Robot cities, AI zoning, sounds like sci-fi, but it's not. It's happening here right in Miami. Today on The Intersection, I'm joined by Olivia Ramos, CEO of DeepBlocks, who's using artificial intelligence to crack open one of the most mysterious, powerful forces shaping our communities, zoning. If you've ever wondered how technology could change what gets built, who gets to build it, you're going to want to stick around. Olivia, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to The Intersection.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, I feel like I've been hounding you because I really wanted you to be on this episode as we explore artificial intelligence and all the amazing things that you're doing in the space of zoning. But when it comes down to robot cities, right, it sounds like something that should be out of an episode of Black Mirror. Tell me, how do you explain DeepBlocks to a friend at a party or a cookout?
If I go to a party or a cookout. Okay. So DeepBlocks brings all the data that allows us to understand what's possible in a city. The size of buildings, the density of buildings, how many people can live there, and all the different parcels that a city has. And so DeepBlocks takes that into account and using artificial intelligence detects which ones are underutilized or underused, and generates a proposal for highest and best use, meaning based on the community, based on the history, about 10 years worth of history, then what should be built.
That sounds fascinating, right? And not just because I practice land use and zoning, but I think the use of artificial intelligence is just something that advances us in a very quick and fast-paced way. But it also can frighten us too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sure you get that as well. But before we jump into that subject, I want to just rewind a little bit because it's not the space that you would typically, wake up one day and say, hey, I want to go and create a company that specializes in AI and zoning. So how did we even get here in the first place?
Yes, so I studied architecture since high school. I went to Design and Architecture Senior High, or DASH, and then got a bachelor's in architecture, a master's in architecture, bachelor's at UF, master's at Columbia University, and realized that the architect often does not make the decisions on what should be built. So I got a second master's in real estate development here at UM, and then worked in construction, brokerage, architecture, development, and realized how fragmented the process was. And so I left the industry and worked for about 3 months in a program with DARPA, with the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency under the Department of Defense, designing big data navigation software based on architectural principles, but essentially a 3D way of understanding tens and thousands of data points. And so I thought that that was my new calling, and took that to Singularity University in Silicon Valley, where I realized it was the merging of my background in architecture and development with this new way of understanding data that could potentially combine all the disciplines into a single intelligence.
So it sounds like years and years of research, of sweat equity, of just time and knowledge has been put into your career. And I think it's evident from seeing you show up in this space and speak, and you're so knowledgeable, but also what you guys are doing with DeepBlocks. Zoning, though, sometimes can feel like a headache or even a hurdle for some developers. What is DeepBlocks doing to, respond to those issues for developers?
Yes, so the first thing, we thought zoning was a data point that we could buy. And that had been digitized already and standardized across the country. And that was a really big mistake in assumption. And so we began to digitize cities. And it took us 3 years to digitize 30 cities and truly understand the patterns and what was really valuable. And so we took the 10 most important parameters for a developer within zoning, basically what describes the building, left everything else behind at first, and then digitized the next 100 cities in under a year. And so now we have a little bit more than what ChatGPT was structured on or trained on for zoning. And now we're training models to extract zoning automatically, to understand zoning, to apply the zoning into the parcel, so that hopefully soon we have every single city in real time, and a model that understands how the city's changing and what the new investment opportunities are. So essentially, developers no longer have to read through zoning codes, or architects for that matter, and very quickly understand what's existing, what's the potential, and move very quickly into impact and development.
The use of AI and the ability to just make information at our fingertips so accessible, I think is such a beautiful thing. But at the same time, I recognize, I guess in my practice of being an attorney, there's some times where I may have clients, they'll say, oh, well, I put this in Chat GPT and it said X, Y, and Z. And I always say, it does not, while AI is so useful, I'm a champion of it, I recognize that it does not replace human expertise, right? And so what's your standpoint on, yes, utilizing the tool of, say, DeepBlocks for understanding the zoning code and what's the best use for the property, but where does lawyers still exist in that equation, right?
Lawyers will always exist, I'm convinced. But
I hope so.
You're absolutely right. And it's not, I don't think the answer is in ChatGPT, because an AI needs structured data to have high certainty on the answer. And ChatGPT doesn't have structured zoning data. It might be able to kind of guess, and some might call it hallucinate, on what could be allowed. But even if you feed it the zoning ordinance, it will not give you the right answer 50% of the times. So what we've done is we've structured that data, and we have the answers for every, over 300 cities. We've structured, this is the zoning ordinance, but then this is the rule, and this is what the rule means, and this is how you interpret it. And so training an AI based on that is different than asking ChatGPT.
I'm glad you clarified that, because that's the missing component that I notice when counseling clients, is that it's not that ChatGPT knows everything. It's really, really keyed onto what is the data that it's analyzing. And so what you're doing in your field, I think, is unique, is that you're making not a one size fit all, but something that's a little bit more particular, right? And that's why it's so interesting that you're utilizing the data from the actual cities themselves, right? Huge point. Now, as it relates to development and even zoning historically, right? There's been history of racial residential segregation. There's history of redlining, all things within the space of zoning that isn't necessarily great, right? There's some historical practices there. Now, when it comes down to AI and it comes down to creating data, how do we make sure that certain biases don't fall within the mix?
That is a really interesting point. So I can imagine, and this is something that I'll speak about for the sake of conversation, but what we focus on is how has zoning changed, and what investment opportunities that allows, that unfolds, right? But if we look back and we look at the zoning changes in a city over time, and we look at the consequences or the output on demographic and racial distribution and economic fluctuation, you might find patterns like the ones you're mentioning. We haven't done that study to know that for sure, because our focus is, can AI tell us where to invest? But I'm sure they're there, and maybe one day we get to do that and really understand that better. And if we do, then I think those biases were created by humans, because AI wasn't creating zoning. But if we prompt AI, let's say a zoning expert AI, to redesign a city for maximum productivity, for maximum equity, for maximum whatever we want the city to be, it will do that based on the rules and the final outcome. I don't think it will take those biases into account.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to say we want the same result from an economic demographic perspective, and this is the data, do the same zoning that had those results.
Right.
So I'm a little bit optimistic in terms of how to use AI to optimize our cities. But if we look back, I'm sure there are a lot of patterns that we can very easily recognize that have had negative impacts on certain groups
Right.
of society.
And I think it's probably useful to recognize the patterns and then to do the opposite of that, right?
Yes.
So that's probably the beauty of the ability to have that data, but then now we know our history. How do we now influence to do something different, right?
Yes.
And better, that's more equitable. And speaking of which, going back to even to the point as we talk about the potential of AI taking away jobs, right?
Mm.
But the flip side of it is that through DeepBlocks, you all tend to provide more opportunities for underrepresented developers, right? It kind of gives them an edge in a sense where maybe you wouldn't have access to certain things, but now with this technology, you do. Can you just share a little bit more about the work you do in that area and how it's actually assisting maybe smaller developers or underrepresented developers in general?
Absolutely. So part of our technology can identifies every single underutilized site of any size and allows you to understand the potential for those sites. And depending on the size of developer that you are and the areas of interest, you'd be able to understand which properties are the best opportunities for investments. We haven't gone so far, for example, for affordable housing and light tech scoring, which is something we're really interested in. We've had close partnerships, but it never went all the way through. But I think there's a lot of opportunities there as well.
Absolutely.
Because affordable housing is usually done by very large brands. And so if smaller developers can identify qualified properties much faster, we'd have more affordable housing probably. So that's something that we can move towards in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. And if you can figure that out, I'm sure even just in affordability in Miami and South Florida is a hot topic. And it's something that we struggle with in terms of across the nation, but definitely down here. And so that ability to be able to assist in that area, because most people don't realize it's just affordable housing might be affordable to the resident, but it's really a huge undertaking for a developer to actually build affordable. Like it's not a easy feat. So something in that area I can see completely benefiting for the greater good in general, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But even market rate housing, you know, there are a lot of opportunities. I'll give you an example. Just in our hometown, Miami, about 16% of all single family homes have been upzoned already, which means you could do a duplex, a fourplex.
Right.
I've seen up to 17 units. And so these are opportunities for smaller developers to come in. It's also an opportunity for the owners of those homes to get a better price if that information was available in public.
Right.
And so there's a lot we could do with the transparency of the impact of zoning. And that requires translation, right? Interpretation of zoning, which
Right.
generally speaking, only lawyers should do it. But we're trying to do just a high level so others can take advantage as well.
I know, Olivia, I'm saying don't steal my job now. But speaking of which, right? Because in my world, zoning is like this invisible string that keeps everything together, where the day-to-day person may not realize how much your zoning code impacts them, right? And so being in government, we know that government is not the fastest thing. It doesn't move very quickly and can be a little resistant to change sometimes. What have you been finding in that area as it relates to cities? Are they open to, or do you provide any services for the cities as well? Or is it primarily for developers?
Primarily for developers, for funds. We're bringing products now that help agents identify investment opportunities for their clients. We are applying to a competition that Miami-Dade County is having about affordable housing and placing residents in better housing. Let's see what happens there. But I see initiatives, popping up, which means there's interest and potential adoption and partnership. So maybe that's moving,
Right.
not as fast as the private sector, but certainly I think they're picking up on the potential impact on the community and on their relationship with the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And even here at the firm, we recognize that, like we mentioned before, there is a place for AI and we're embracing it. Our practice area is booming in that area intentionally because I'm always of the mindset that it's either you're going to get with it or get lost. And I don't want to get lost. And at the end of the day, it seems like AI is here and it's here to stay, right? And it's actually very useful tools that make our lives easier and better. I want to speak a little bit because, again, I find your background unique, right? Having a startup and being a founder or, having a company, I know there are very pivotal moments in your life, right? When you had to make a decision or to do something. In your journey so far, because I also want to speak to the person on the other side of this conversation that might be looking at you as inspiration of like, wow, like look at what she's done and what she's been able to create. What's been a pivot moment as a founder where you had to say to yourself, okay, this isn't working, but let me shift gears into another direction?
There's been a lot of those, some important ones. Let's say one on the subject of zoning is early on understanding that we were not going to be able to digitize all of zoning. Like zoning has so many contingencies and so many gray areas.
Absolutely.
That to get, which is, that's why you're
Yes.
never going to lose your job.
I live in the gray.
Exactly. But if we wanted to bring something that didn't exist, that was valuable, and we kept it high level, it could still be impactful and scalable. So that was a big decision. Do we go deep in a city and try to digitize the entire thing? Or do we do a shallow move, but then we're able to compare cities and move across many cities and potentially optimize zoning at a very high level? And so that was, I think, one of the most important decisions we made, that we probably maybe have 40 cities now after 7 years as opposed to 300. So that was one pivotal. Another one on the funding side, let's say,
Right.
is realizing that not everyone with money is going to invest in your startup. And so we became very good at identifying people who really deeply understood what we were doing and the potential impact. And those became our investors. But you think just, people really have to understand, or investors need to understand what we're doing.
Right.
And I think startups or startup founders should know that.
And I think it's important to be able to communicate clearly, concisely, what it is that you're doing, right? Because if you're asking someone to invest in a potential or something hypothetical, that's a lot to ask of a person. And I imagine the funding that's required for the type of intelligence that you all are working with is probably significant. So to get those type of folks to buy in, it takes someone to be very persuasive, but not just persuasive to sell you a dream, but to also have the knowledge and skill set behind it, right? And so I was happy that you laid out your background because it kind of shows that this wasn't an overnight idea. It was something that was methodical and intentional, and it took you time to get to this point. In terms of your background, right, being a Latina woman and being a woman at that, when it comes down in tech, have there been any challenges or obstacles in that regard, or no, not at all?
I hear about them. And there's some statistics that are painful to hear, but I can't pay attention to that. I have to just look forward. I have to do my best, and I have to trust.
Yeah.
And so if I get caught up in what's unfair or what's unequal, like that takes away energy that I could be using for moving forward.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Because I do think that sometimes it can become draining in that matter, but the work that you're doing speaks for itself. And I think sometimes that's having the tunnel vision up and just doing the work and having the results is really what matters. Olivia, this has been such a informative conversation, and maybe it could be the nerd in me that likes to talk about zoning and land use and what's shaping our cities. But from your perspective, like 10 years from now, what do cities look like? What does development look like with AI being completely embraced?
10 years from now. So let's assume that AI is growing exponentially and the speed of growth is also exponential. And so 10 years from now, we'll have the ability to invest in real estate like we invest in the stock market. And we'll have the ability to track every resource that goes through a building. And then we'll rate the building based on their efficiency. And therefore, better buildings will be funded by the public and faster. And so I think new ways of funding will be available. New ways of tracking the resources that we have available will also be visible and transparent. And a lot more people will be able to invest in good real estate.
Awesome. So I'm looking forward to seeing that future.
Me too.
And I really do thank you for joining us. And like I told you, I was hounding you because I believed in your expertise, and I'm happy that you came here to share it with us. And so we look forward to seeing where DeepBlocks grow and what all is to come.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Olivia showed us how AI can open doors. But what happens when those doors run up against government rules and public trust? To unpack that, I'm here with my colleague, Danny Simo, who practices in our Municipal and Emerging Technology Law Group. So Danny, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy to have you here at the intersection.
Thank you for having me. I thought you'd never ask.
It wasn't gonna be too long, right? You know that. But look, I want to chat with you briefly about AI, right? You are a part of the firm's AI practice group, as am I, and you've been knee deep into a lot of these things. So as a municipal attorney, when you hear AI, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Can we stop talking about AI? I mean, honestly, that's really what first comes to mind. I'll try another one, but I think that no, I think AI is really exciting, and it's definitely been like the buzzword and term of this year and maybe 2024. But I think that people are really excited about, the prospect of what artificial intelligence, and specifically generative artificial intelligence, can do in different industries. And I think we're sort of trying to figure out what are the pros, what are the cons, and how do we use this tool effectively so that we are, being ethical, so that we are respecting the environment. Right. So those are sort of my initial thoughts about AI.
So let's talk about some of the pros then, right? Because you mentioned that there's some pros, there's some cons. We service a lot of municipalities, right? I don't want to brag or say a number that's not true, but I don't know any other firm that represents as many as we do, at least within South Florida. So what are you advising clients that are some of the benefits of utilizing AI?
Yeah, so I think, Chanae, we work with different city local governments, right? And those cities are organisms in and of themselves, and they have different departments, right? So there's the Parks and Rec department. There's solid waste. There's your sewer and sewer department. So I think first you have to look at who is my client. It's this giant entity, and within the entity you're going to have different needs from those different groups, right? So I think right now what we're advising, at least, and we also you and I both represent nonprofit organizations as well, community-based organizations. So I think there needs to be sort of a broad policy and an overarching policy for all employees, all staff, even board members. And then when it comes to how do we use it effectively, it really is going to depend on the department or the specific use that you're looking at, because obviously AI is transforming industries, all industries, right? And there are different ways that our firm is using generative AI. There are different ways that the Parks and Rec department at one of our cities could benefit from AI. So I think it really is going to require people to sit down and think about, how can we use this tool to our benefit? And I'll give you an example. I think, you and I are always knees deep in these municipal ordinances, and I think that's one of the ways that, you can put in all these municipal ordinances into the generative AI and help you digest the information. Because sometimes it feels like so much information is overwhelming. I think that's one of the ways that it can help.
So earlier, I was speaking to Olivia Ramos, and she was explaining all the exciting things that she's doing with DeepBlocks as it relates to development, and particularly with developers. From your work on the public side, are you seeing municipalities incorporate more AI or using contractors to bring that type of resource and intelligence to our cities?
Yeah, definitely. I think Olivia's company is a really good example of how she is, how DeepBlocks is trying to make waves in just the real estate space. We're seeing the same thing on the municipal side. And on the public side, there is this push for efficiency, right? And there's a lot of noise about, well, government is so efficient, and how do we ensure that...
You said it's noise that government is efficient?
Did I say is? I meant to say it's not
Okay, because I was going to say, Danny, where you heard that at?
There's noise that government is wholly inefficient, and I take issue with that, though. I think that there are inefficiencies in government, but AI is not the end-all, be-all, and it's not going to solve all of our problems. Again, I think this has to be done in a thoughtful manner. But one of the things the cities are doing, and on the public side, I'm seeing there are a lot of companies that are coming and trying to win contracts to assist cities with, it might be note-taking, for example. There are now software, there are now different programs that can actually record entire meetings. And it used to be that you and I might have to sit through a meeting, monitor, make sure that we get down all the notes, and then someone's taking the minutes. Well, now there's software out there that can do the minutes for you. And I think that also just comes to another point, which is that we can have the AI, the generative AI, create the minutes, right? But you still need a human. You still need the human element, someone to oversee, what the work product is.
Absolutely. And I think this segues into a really good point that I tend to make with the public clients that I counsel, which is that there are some laws that only apply to us as local governments or as government entities, and one of those being the Sunshine Law, right? And so, or the public records. And so there's been times where I'll log on to a meeting and these AI or systems automatically records a conversation. Now, in our world of being in the public sector, I'm not saying that, by no means, transparency is great, but there's sometimes that you just don't want to create a public record, right? And so it's important that clients are aware that, yes, these tools and resources are really great and helpful, but we have to be mindful of the laws that govern us in the arena that we play in. And how do we make sure that, yes, we're using AI to our advantage, but we're also being mindful of the ways that it can be probably a little damaging, right? And so what's some of the red flags you'd say you warn municipalities about when it comes down to the use?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful about what issue we're trying to solve when we're deciding to use some sort of generative AI product. So one example might be, I've been reading some articles about how companies are using chatbots to basically respond as if, I email Chanae and I get this lovely response back, and I think I'm talking to Chanae, but I'm actually talking to a chatbot. It was actually on LinkedIn. It was a post I saw. Someone thought that they were talking to the CEO of a company, and this person was really upset and said, this is something that should be disclosed. And so I think governments right now, Miami-Dade County is a perfect example of a larger government that's trying to figure out how best to use AI. But what they're doing is basically putting together committees, they have people working on these issues day and night just to think about what's the best way to use this.
Right.
Do we want someone contacting Miami-Dade County and getting a chatbot? In some situations it might be appropriate, in others it might not. So I think it's really a case-by-case basis, and it's going to really require us to think about how we're using the tool.
Right, absolutely, I agree. And I'm really, really happy that you took out the time to just unpack the governmental side of this, because it's important that at the intersection, right, we're bringing all the players to the table to figure out how do we create the best cities and living situations for everyone. And so this is a topic, and I know you're tired of it. I know you're tired of the AI topic, but it is one that I think is important for us to get our minds around, because I think it can be so helpful to advance everyone in general, right? And obviously there's some drawbacks to it, and I make sure to tell anybody, and I'm telling you, you can't replace us. These lawyers are here to stay, but nonetheless, I think that if we embrace it in a way that both makes us productive, but also still authentic, is very, very important.
Could I say something to that point? I think you're absolutely right, and I do think that really what I say that I'm sort of, AI, it's all we've talked about this year, it feels like.
Yeah.
But it's because it's so transformative, and because it's so important that we need to talk about how it's going to affect all of our industries, right? One thing I'll mention is that we don't have a federal AI law right now. There was it was proposed in the Big Beautiful Bill that there would be some sort of preemption at the federal level, and that did not pass. So now we have individual states trying to regulate AI. And so just like with any technology, we're seeing the law is trying to catch up to the technology. And another example might be like Uber. When Uber came out, it completely disrupted the taxi cab industry, right? And it had all these unintended consequences and impacts. And so I think that's what we need to stay tuned for, is just how are different state legislatures, local governments, federal and international players looking at these issues. And for us, I think it's most important as lawyers, but in any industry, to make sure that we remain ethical and that the pros outweigh the cons, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Danny, I want to talk a little bit about the flip side of AI, right? Which is that a lot of times people use it to write and to send emails and to do all the things. And even now, let's say outside of the law, outside of government, on our social medias, right? On our LinkedIn pages. Do you feel like AI is removing authenticity in a way? Like you don't get the real person, you get someone else who wrote the message or who wrote the post. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I think there's sort of a consensus amongst people who are writers or even news reporters that they don't want to use this tool, generative artificial intelligence, to do the work that they're called to do, which is writing, right? And I think there's something so important about just the process of of writing. And so I think that there are benefits to using it sometimes. Like, I won't lie to you, sometimes I'll use the Copilot on my email and say, like, have it regenerate, and then I end up revising it. But I think that I'm trying to move towards not using it at all when it comes to the writing that I'm putting forth as my own.
Yeah.
And if you are, I think you should just have a disclaimer that says something to the effect of, I used AI to.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, right?
I don't mean to laugh, but okay.
I mean, I think that there's, but I am a little bit worried about it. I think that I'm confronting more and more people every day who are like, who feel like a chatbot. I'm like, are you a person? Or are you artificial? Am I artificial intelligence now? I don't know. It does feel like there's something we're missing, and it's that human element.
Yeah.
So
I understand that, and I think that's my concern as well, is that while I really am a champion of AI, and I think that, hey, like, it can really advance us in so many ways, I am a very organic type of girl. Now, not all the time with my food, but in general, like, I like authenticity, I like genuine conversations, and so my hope is that AI doesn't erase that side of life in general. And so while we are happy to embrace it, I still feel like this and that pen and paper really does matter. And I hope, even from the standpoint of having, a toddler, I hope that my son, doesn't get hooked on this, or my fear is that, is he gonna know how to write? It's just,
right. Or even think, right?
Yeah.
I think that thinking is like, is there any independent thought anymore? And I think we know that these generative AI software, when you're talking to the ChatGPT, it's almost, and you guys talked a little bit about this with Olivia Ramos, but there is a bias embedded in it, right? And what we're finding is that actually, when you're speaking to the ChatGPT, it's really mirroring you and your questions, right? And it might give you an answer, and unless you prompt it and really question it, it's just like your mind, right? I can think that this is the right answer, but there's a level of thinking that we do as humans that we cannot let the AI do for us, right? And I have seen people talk about, again, this is why I go back to the ethical ways to use AI. Some people are saying, now I don't have to feel like a robot in my job anymore. Now this is giving me the opportunity and the space to do the things that I do want to do, right? So if you look at it that way, I mean, think about it. AI can now help you do things that felt monotonous before, and that may give you an opportunity to do other things that are more creative and that you've been wanting to do.
Right. Very true.
So.
Very true. Well, look, this was a great conversation. I enjoyed having you here, and just don't worry. You don't have to worry about having another call. You will get a call back, because we have more to unpack and to talk about as it relates to the law in general. And a lot of the things that we talk about separately, I believe, should be here and highlighted for our viewers as well. So thank you again for joining me, and we'll see you next time at the intersection. Don't worry.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
So are we headed for robot cities? Maybe not the kind Hollywood imagines, but Olivia Ramos and DeepBlocks are showing us that AI can unlock smarter, faster, and maybe even fairer growth. Big thanks to Olivia and to Danny for helping us make sense of what this means for the law, for developers, and for communities we call home. This is the intersection where power, policy, and progress collide. We'll see you on the next episode.